Okay, so we're going to continue here with the work on American independence by Samuel Adams. This was delivered in Philadelphia in August of 1776. We shall neither be exposed to the necessary convulsions of elected monarchies, nor to the want of wisdom, fortitude, and virtue, to which hereditary succession is liable. In your hands it will be to perpetuate a prudent, active, and just legislature, which will never expire until you yourselves lose the virtues which give it existence. Okay, so we're going to continue to unpack this here. So a monarchy, an elective monarchy. A monarchy is a system of government in which you have the sovereign head of state, which is the king or the queen, that has centralized authority. Of course, in the system that he refers to in England, we have a system of government that includes this king or the queen, but also has a representative legislature that writes the laws. But given this sovereignty, such a mass of power in the head of the body of the state, there is convulsions. There are large ripple effects that one decision made at the top have to the rest of the body of society. It's not a emanatory and emergent relationship. It's purely emanatory for the most part. That is, whatever the sovereign says, whatever the head of state says, will be. End of story. And so this is why I believe he says that, if we are to separate from England here, we shall neither be exposed to the necessary convulsions of elective monarchies. Okay, and then he continues, nor to the want of wisdom, fortitude, and virtue, to which hereditary succession is liable. Hereditary succession means inheritance through blood relations, positions in society, political positions, positions of power, heads of state or heads of institutions, in the hands of certain families. He continues, in your hands it will be to perpetuate a prudent, active, and just legislature, which will never expire until you yourselves lose the virtue which give it existence, which we know from the previous episode is sort of the experience of England at this time. Of course, they have the elective monarchy, so they have those necessary convulsions. But they also experience the loss of virtue, which give rise to the very culture of the sovereignty of the individual, private property, rule of law, and the like. And brethren and fellow countrymen, if it was ever granted to mortals to trace the designs of Providence and interpret its manifestations in favor of their cause, we may, with humility of soul, cry out, not unto us, not unto us, but to your name be the praise. The confusion of the devices among our enemies and the rage of the elements against them have done almost as much toward our success as either our counsels or our arms. So he's saying here that if we were able to trace the divine protection, the type of protection that is afforded to a person or a group of people that adhere to the truth and are forthright, they stand tall, and they do what is right in the eyes of what is right. In other words, what is right is in the eyes of God. And it's within this providence. If we were to follow it, we would not give ourselves credit for what we have followed. We would give the thing that we follow the credit, because it is what saved us. It is what delivered us. The commitment to the truth is what saved us. The confusion of the devices among our enemies, and the rage of the elements against them, have done almost as much towards our success as either our counsel or our arms. So the confusion of the devices among our enemies. That is, our enemies don't know what to do with us. They don't quite know how to orient themselves in the face of a body of people, the spirit of people that is true. How do you corrupt something that is right? Of course, there are many ways to do so, but it's in this very confusion. And I would go farther to say that it's within the attempt to have a cause that is something less than, to subvert something that is more than, that creates the confusion. Because how are you to orient yourself if you don't know how to properly place your designs or your plans? And if your plans are, like I said, beneath the plans of another, and I know this is a bit vague, but by plans, I'm sort of referring to the entire project of developing a state and the culture that underlies it. These plans, if virtuous, are correct. They are the plans of liberty. They are the plans of liberation, true liberation. And to subvert that is a difficult thing to do, because the mind, I think, naturally wants to follow its reason. And if you attempt to convince yourself to deliberately confuse your reason, to draw somebody away from their liberation in the face of subjugation, unjust subjugation. I'm not sure if there is such a thing as just subjugation. Perhaps there is a context in which it might be, but certainly not in this context. Not in the case of the arbitrary power of man over the other, without his consent. He continues, the time at which this attempt on our liberties was made, when we were ripened into maturity, had acquired the knowledge of war, and were free from the incursions of enemies in this country. The gradual advances of our oppressor, enabling us to prepare for our defense, the unusual fertility of our lands and the clemency of the seasons, the success which at first attended our feeble arms, producing unanimity among our friends, and reducing our internal foes to acquiescence. These are all strong and palpable marks and assurances that Providence is yet gracious unto Zion, and it will turn away the captivity of Jacob. So again, this is a reference to slavery in Egypt by Jews. Zion is, I believe, a reference to Jerusalem, to the Promised Land. A place of Israel as a whole. And so he gives these examples. And he equates this pattern, this story that we have seen in the biblical literature. And it is the same pattern that plays out. Of course, we have another nation here who is godly. They are after the truth. They are after what is, not for some corruptible cause. And they recognize the importance of staying liberated from the corruptible causes, as this is suboptimal. It does not lead to success. Our glorious reformers, when they broke through the fetters of the superstition, effected more than could be expected from an age so darkened, but they left so much to be done by their posterity. They lopped off, indeed, some of the branches of popery, but they left the root and stock when they left us under the domination of human systems and decisions, usurping infallibility, which can be attributed to revelation only. So another profound statement here by Samuel Adams. Our glorious reformers. So of course he's talking about something that is much older than the American experience. He says, when they broke through the fetters of superstition, effected more than could be expected from an age so darkened. So they were ahead of their time, but they left much to be done to his generation, to the generation of Samuel Adams. They cut off some of the branches that were seen to subjugate them, that was seen to, as in his words, usurp the infallibility which can be attributed to revelation only. They took what is considered to be perfect, and they reduced it. That is, anything of this tree. This tree is a symbol here, in this case. It's a symbol of the usurper, because in this case, the popery, again, a usurper of perfection, bringing it down to human form, removing it from the divinity and putting it into human form. These were but the branches. He says, but they left the root and the stock when they left us under the domination of human systems and decisions. So this is an important point. They are trying to liberate themselves from human control, obviously. The implications of which are fascinating to reflect on. Because if they liberate themselves from this type of control, from the control of other humans over themselves, they are left with the supreme being, the divinity, as the ruler over them, which also means that it's their responsibility to accept what, the burdens, the complexities of existence, the existential struggles that entails, but also the responsibility to hold everything together. Because at one time, when we consider the monarchy, but it could be any sort of state with a centralized authority apparatus, they are essentially saying, we need to cut off this head. But if you cut off the head, you are essentially cutting off the tie that ties together. In my mind, I'm picturing a sort of a tie that ties a bag of small potatoes together. And once you tie this out, the potatoes are sort of free to fall out of the bag, and they at one time they were united in this body, within this bag together. But now they are thrown about across the floor into a multiplicity. Something that is less stable, less united, open to predation. Of course, the thing that unites them is above all of them. They're saying it can't be a man that does this, or a centralized authority, like a Politburo, like the communists or the fascists or something like this, or one person like a king or a queen. And so he says the usurping of infallibility can only be attributed to revelation. And this revelation is the flipping of the mind into a new frame. Again, to bring back Plato, it is the Platonic example of moving up and out of the cave into a new realm of reality, a new interpretation, a new clarity. This comprises a revelation. But it's only within this revelatory capacity that we can realize for ourselves the truth. Because if we ourselves don't do it, of course we can be deluded. We can make the changes for ourselves. Instead of one other person who is just as susceptible to being deluded and just as ignorant as we are, if they make one decision, it dilutes the rest of us. It deludes the rest of us. We follow the same delusion and illusions that this person comes up with within their mind. Of course, you can have the opposite happen. You can have a great leader that is for the truth. You can have, just as in the Old Testament, a king in King David who rules justly. But in the end, it is quite clear in the Old Testament that God, the divine spirit, divine providence, is against having a king over his people, a king over the people of Israel. And I think it is for this reason that the people have to be free to do it themselves. And again, it's not, this liberation is not a free pass to do whatever we want. There are enormous constraints on individual action in a free society. He continues, they dethroned one usurper only to raise up another. They refused allegiance to the Pope, only to place the civil magistrate in the throne of Christ, vested with authority to enact laws and inflict penalties in his kingdom. And if we now cast our eyes over the nations of the earth, we shall find that instead of possessing the pure religion of the gospel, they may be divided either into infidels who deny the truth, or politicians who make religion a stalking horse for their ambition, or professors who talk in the trammels of orthodoxy, and are more attentive to traditions and ordinances of men than to the oracles of truth. In other words, they're secular in their orientation. So I know I mentioned this in another episode, but it's important, I think, to mention it again here. This is very reminiscent of the French Revolution, in which they threw off the yoke of what they considered to be the arbitrary priestly authority, only for a despot to come in the form of Napoleon, and in his delusion try to conquer the whole of Europe. And you can see here an interesting dynamic, a very traditional society that was the American colonies and the newly formed American government, that were looking to place power in its proper place and to give the throne to Christ, essentially, a Christian nation, and that no man would have the sole authority, if not given consent, to enact the laws and inflict penalties. It is up to us to decide that together. And we decide that based on divine providence, based on forthrightness. And so essentially what that means is, if the mind of man fails in a free society, his government fails. The civil magistrate has everywhere contaminated religion by making it an engine of policy. And freedom of thought and the right of private judgment in matters of conscience, driven from every other corner of the earth, directed their course to this happy country as their last asylum. Let us cherish the noble guests and shelter them under the wings of an universal toleration. Be this the seat of unbounded religious freedom. She will bring with her in a train industry, wisdom, and commerce. She thrives most when left to shoot forth in her natural luxuriance, and asks from human policy only not to be checked in her growth by artificial encouragements. So I do think it's worth asking the question, why then, if you have a civil magistrate that is religious to its core, that desires the truth, why then does it contaminate religion by making it an engine of policy? What happens in this process that corrupts it, that contaminates it? I'm not entirely sure I have the answer to that. I think there are two possibilities. There's something within the process itself, within the structure, or it's that the religious view itself, which is problematic. And I'm inclined to believe the former. And freedom of thought and the right of private judgment in matters of conscience, driven from every other corner of the earth, directed their course to this happy country as their last asylum. And perhaps that's just it. It is when the religious system, the religious framework, begins to deny those the right of private judgment and freedom of thought, then it violates itself. And when it violates itself, it becomes self-destructive. And so therefore, it's nonsensical to have a religious system that is used by the civil magistrate to control its citizens, because it's inherently antagonistic to itself. And so these people recognize this, and they flee. They flee to a country that will give them asylum, a place that will tolerate them, that will shelter them under their wings, that will give them their religious freedom. And with these people, these forthright people, these people that stand up tall with their head high, they will bring industry, they will bring wisdom, they will bring commerce. Again, through their freedom of thought and their private judgments. She thrives most when left to shoot forth in her natural luxuriance, and asks for human policy only not to be checked in her growth by artificial encouragements. Thus, by the beneficence of Providence, we shall behold our empire arising, founded on justice and the voluntary consent of the people, and giving full exercise of those faculties and rights which most ennoble our species. Besides the advantages of liberty and the most equal constitution, Heaven has given us a country with every variety of climate and soil, pouring forth in abundance whatever is necessary for the support, comfort, and strength of a nation. Within our own borders we possess all the means of sustenance, defense, and commerce. At the same time, these advantages are so disturbed among the different states of this continent, as if nature had in view to proclaim us, "Be united among yourselves, and you will want nothing from the rest of the world." A Garden of Eden of sorts, it seems. The more northern states most amply supply us with every necessary, and many of the luxuries of life, with iron, timber, and masts for ships or commerce or of war, with flax for the manufacture of linen, and seed, either for oil or exportation. So abundant are the harvests that almost every part raised more than double the quantity of grain requisite for the support of its inhabitants. From Georgia to Carolina we have, as well for our own wants as for the purpose of supplying the wants of other powers, indigo, rice, hemp, naval stores, and lumber. Virginia and Maryland teem with wheat, Indian corn, and tobacco. Every nation whose harvest is precarious, or whose lands yield not those commodities which we cultivate, will gladly exchange their superfluities and manufactures to ours. We have already received many a larger cargoes of clothing, military stores, etc., from our commerce with foreign powers, and in spite of the efforts of the boasted Navy of England, we shall continue to profit by this connection. So of course he's saying here we have everything that we need. Despite England's interference, we will continue to do so. Because, again, we are following divine providence. We have a right to do this, a right to be here, and they have no right to take it from us. The want of our naval stores has already increased the price of these articles to a great height, especially in Britain. Without our lumber, it will be impossible for those haughty islanders to convey the products of the West Indies to their own ports. For a while they may with difficulty effect it, but without our assistance their resources must soon fail. Indeed, the West India Islands appear as the necessary appendages to this our empire. They must owe their support to it, and ere long, I doubt not, some of them will, from necessity, wish to enjoy the benefit of our protection. These natural advantages will enable us to remain independent of the world, or to make it the interest of European powers to court our alliance and aid in protecting us against the invasions of others. What argument, therefore, do we want to show the equity of our conduct, or motive of interest, to recommend it to our prudence? Nature points out the path, and our enemies have obliged us to pursue it. If there is any man so base or so weak as to prefer a dependence on Great Britain to the dignity and happiness of living a member of a free and independent nation, let me tell him that necessity now demands what the generous principles of patriotism should have dictated. We have now no other alternative than independence, or the most ignominious and galling servitude. The legions of our enemies thicken on our plains. Desolation and death mark their bloody career, whilst the mangled corpses of our countrymen seem to cry out to us as a voice from heaven, quote, "Will you permit our posterity to groan under the galling chains of our murderers? Has our blood been expended in vain? Is the only reward which our constancy till death has obtained for our country, that it should be sunk into a deeper and more ignominious vassalage? Recollect who are the men that demand your submission, to whose decrees you are invited to pay obedience. Men who, unmindful of their relation to you as brethren, of your long implicit submission to their laws, of the sacrifice which you and your forefathers made of your natural advantages for commerce to their avarice, formed a deliberate plan to wrest from you all the small pittance of property which they have permitted you to acquire. Remember that men who wish to rule over you are they who, in pursuit of this plan of despotism, annulled the sacred contracts which have been made with your ancestors, conveyed into your cities mercenary soldiery, and compel you to submission by insult and murder, who called to your patience cowardice, your piety hypocrisy. Countrymen, the men who now invite you to surrender your rights into their hands are the men who have let loose the merciless savages to riot in the blood of your brethren, who have dared to establish popery triumphant in our land, who have taught treachery to your slaves and quartered them to assassinate your wives and children. These are the men whom we exhorted sacrifice and blessings, which Providence holds out to us, the happiness, the dignity of uncontrolled freedom and independence. Our union is now complete, our Constitution composed, established, and approved. You are now the guardians of your own liberties. We may justly address you as the decemviri did the Romans, and say, nothing that we propose can pass into law without your consent. Be yourselves, O Americans, the authors of those laws on which your happiness depends. You have now in the field of armies sufficient to repel the whole force of your enemies and their base and mercenary auxiliaries. The hearts of your soldiers beat high with the spirit of freedom. They are animated with the justice of their cause, and while they grasp their swords, can look up to heaven for assistance. Your adversaries are composed of wretches who laugh at the rights of humanity, who turn religion into derision, and would for higher wages direct their swords against their leaders or their country. In other words, these are men of little virtue, diminished valor. Go on then, he continues, in your generous enterprise, with gratitude of heaven for past success and confidence of it in the future. For my own part, I ask no greater blessing than to share with you the common danger and common glory. If I have a wish dearer to my soul than that my ashes may be mingled with those of a Warren or a Montgomery, in other words, patriots, it is that these American states may never cease to be free and independent. And so my closing statement here would be, it seems as though our forefathers accepted the responsibility of the burdens that existence brings to us. That to be a free nation is not necessarily something of absolute liberation. It is not a liberation of the ego. It is not the uncontrolled self. It is in fact the opposite. But the thing that does the subjugation is the divine authority. It is the cultural tradition, the values, the morals, ethics that we all conform to, that we all adhere to, that we all recognize as common goods. And if we fail to have this common understanding of reality, we'll break into multiplicity, like the analogy I gave with the bag of potatoes and the tie that holds the bag together. Once that goes, and the potatoes are released from their bag and onto the floor, they roll under the bed and into the most annoying places. This type of multiplicity is no union, and whatever state is left after this disunion will be susceptible to rot and disease and to subjugation. And I think in our modern day we have to remember the words of Samuel Adams, because what we risk to lose is everything.